Welcome back. You're watching our comprehensive budget headquarters coverage here on CNBC TV 18. We've been decoding the budget, and it's time now for us to get more analysis on what corporate India makes of the budget. Joining me here in the studio, Ajay Singh of SpiceJet, Bishwajit Bhattacharyya, former Additional Solicitor General, Manoj Kohli, who's moved from telecom now to renewable energy, and also with us is Vinayak Chatterjee of Feedback Infra. We'll be joined by other corporate citizens from Mumbai in just a bit. But gentlemen, thanks very much. You've had more hours now to decode the budget. Vinayak, let me start by asking you, feel good? Could have done more? Done enough?
Feel good for the infrastructure sector generally, and certainly overall. Now let me focus on infra sector, which is the sector I need to comment on. See, out of a total budgetary allocation of 21.47 lakh crores, 3.96 lakh crores has been allocated for infrastructure, which is around 18-19%. I do not think the infrastructure sector could have asked for more. It shows focus, it shows emphasis, and more importantly, there are no new wacko ideas. Most of the allocations are for projects that have demonstrated traction. And which are the projects and programs which have demonstrated traction? Highways, rural roads, renewables, rural electricity, irrigation. So they're all in the right direction, and they're fueling the growth of these, which are programs that carry on for 4-5 years. So full marks on the focus and the allocations to the infrastructure sector, which I believe has gone up by about 25%. So we have no cribs on that account.
Okay.
So there are a bunch of new ideas also. For example, the PPP in airports for landside, city-side development, the monetization of airport land, the new Metro Act for PPP, etc., etc. So there are a bunch of new ideas.
No wacko ideas, and altogether good direction as far as infrastructure is concerned.
Directionally correct, but a few areas which I'm going to take a little time to say, a few buttons that we hoped would be pressed. The biggest expectation, which we discussed in the morning, was para, which is that the biggest problem in the infrastructure sector is to get the private investment mood up and rolling. And therefore, if the FM had just alluded to the fact that the economic survey had recommended para, and a movement in that direction would help.
For the viewers who are watching, PARA is the Public Asset Rehabilitation Agency. Broadly, perhaps you could call it a bad bank, which is the idea that's been suggested by the Chief Economic Advisor. Though the Finance Minister, as well as the Financial Services Secretary, who was here a short while ago, did say that it's an idea that's under discussion. Maybe because it's exploratory at this point in time, he didn't want to...
Yes, except that it would have been nice for the sector, since that is the big elephant, in terms of problems, that is the big elephant in the room. Even an allusion to NPAs, stressed assets, the fact that a para-type idea would be given due thought would have significantly helped the mood of the sector.
But you go away happy tonight.
I go away happy tonight.
He goes away happy. Ajay Singh, you go away indifferent, because specifically for your sector, beyond amending the Airports Authority Act to monetize land, greenfield airports, expansion and upgradation of airports and so on and so forth, there's operationally not much that will benefit you, but there is an incredible India 2 that's coming, so maybe that could help you.
No, certainly. Even the airport monetization, to the extent that that money can be used to lower cost of airports themselves, I think that would be great. See, the biggest challenge we face in our sector is that the aviation turbine fuel that we have is the most expensive in the world. The airports that we have are the most expensive in the world, and the fares that we sell are amongst the most competitive in the world. So we need to move to a far lower cost economy so that we can be competitive around the world. And to the extent that this budget is doesn't do much for that, but airport land, outside of aviation, I think excellent budget. I think it increases.
Could have done more in specific areas.
You can always do more.
Of course they can.
Of course
but in specific areas.
Just lowering taxes for corporates under 50 crores, I think that's a good move. It helps even the aviation sector because it increases demand for that sector. Reducing income tax for people with 2.5 to 5 lakhs, I think that helps. This whole focus on public spending, this whole focus on infrastructure, focus on the rural sector, I think all of it, I think there is very little that you can say is wrong with this budget. I think it's a good, solid, prudent budget.
So I think the criticism can only be what else could he have done.
Yes,
as Vinayak said, no wacko ideas, no nasty
Nothing
surprises.
Crazy. I think it's a solid budget. It represents the man and this government, and they've done something sensible and even growth oriented. So they have taken away some of the pain of the demonetization with the gain of lower taxes on certain categories of people, and this is a significant number of people, so it should happen.
Okay, Manoj Kohli, let me ask you now, we were talking about demonetization and the impact of demonetization. Growth even irrespective of demonetization, has been impacted, if you look at what the economic survey says. But if I were to ask you to highlight for me the single biggest idea of this budget that could, I mean, you know, every finance minister says my budget is transformational, but for you, the single biggest idea that will go down as the highlight.
No, I will first like to compliment the finance minister. I think building a budget for India is a trapeze artist story. You have to be a trapeze artist because you have to balance, on one hand, growth, which is very critical for the country. Other hand, fiscal discipline, which is also important. So I think he has been able to do that.
Okay.
So that's the first compliment and most important, because balancing these two is very difficult.
It's tough, yeah.
Very difficult. But I think the biggest thing I have noticed is that he has invested a lot in infrastructure, invested a lot in rural development,
yeah.
invested much more. He could have done more, but Make in India, manufacturing sector. And I believe some tax reduction, all this as a combo will lead to more money in the pockets of customers.
As private investors, are you feeling more confident? Do you expect
Absolutely.
private investment to pick up?
Absolutely. I believe the national consumption will pick up.
Okay.
I believe incomes will pick up. I believe the growth, now whether it is 6.5 or 7%, we'll come to know later, but I think anything close to 7% is a fantastic growth target for a country like ours.
Okay.
At this stage of the global economy. So overall, I think a balanced budget, a robust budget between growth and discipline.
Quick point, Vinayak.
Quick point, Shereen, is that in economic history terms, this 2017 budget, if there is one big idea which I will remember 10 years from now, it will be the big idea of electoral funding cleanup. I think it's the big idea of this budget, and I welcome it. There is a saying that fish starts rotting from the top, from the head, and if you attack the head, a lot of things are going to fall into place. It's the single biggest idea of this budget is this whole business of electoral bonds and the election cleanup attempt. I hope it succeeds, and I laud the government for doing something which we should have done 50 years ago.
Okay, I agree with you. Electoral bonds and cleaning up political funding is one of the big ideas as far as this budget is concerned. Pawan, Goenka, you can't say electoral bonds and you can't say political funding is the highlight. Add to that list of the biggest highlights from this budget.
Well, I think the way I look at this is that the budget continues the agenda that has been put in place and not getting into newer things for sake of doing new things. That is one. And the second one, I would say that there was a fear that this budget, because of pending elections, could become a populist budget and do things that are meant more for votes. And I couldn't see a single thing that was specifically aimed at looking at the upcoming state elections. So these are the two things that stand out to me as something that I appreciate from this budget.
Are you feeling confident, sir? I was asking the gentleman here with me in the Delhi studio if they're feeling confident about a revival in consumption. Are you going to be able to sell more Scorpios, more Boleros? You know, given what we've seen as far as the thrust on rural is concerned, what is your sense about the possibility of rural revival as well?
Well, what I didn't see in the budget clearly is what is there to spur short-term demand. There's certainly everything going in the right direction. Certainly it's going to have an impact because there will be a cascading impact of investment in infra and all the different things. But in rural sector, what happens in the next 3 months? That I haven't seen enough of. All the initiatives that we have are for the long term, and that's good. We must have long-term initiatives. But the sort of effect of demonetization that is there in the rural India, is there enough to take care of that is something that I have not seen. But I think having said that, the rural economy is on a growth path. The monsoon was good, the incomes were good, and once the fear that was there because of the cash crunch goes away, I think rural economy will pick up by itself.
Let me ask you a direct
I feel
question,
confident
sir,
that
because
our demand will come back up.
The government said they don't expect the demonetization impact to spill over to the new financial year. Is that your assessment as well on what you're seeing on the ground?
I have been saying that for the past 4 weeks, so I fully agree with that. I think by end of this financial year, we should not see any leftover effect of demonetization, because basically the cash will be back in circulation because remonetization will happen. And I think both in the rural area as well as urban area, the folks will become a lot more comfortable in digital transaction, a lot more comfortable in bank transaction, and therefore the effect of demonetization will be over by end of March is my assessment also.
Let me go across to the former Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank, Dr. Rakesh Mohan, also with us. Dr. Mohan, fiscal consolidation, the recommendations of the FRBM committee have not, in the sense, been adopted in this budget, but they've spelt out the fiscal roadmap. They've deviated a tad to 3.2%, but said that they will do 3% the next year. What do you make of this budget and its attempt to balance the need for expansion with fiscal prudence?
Has clearly done usual very good job in terms of balancing different pressures, interests, and the balance between fiscal consolidation and growth. So I have no quarrel at all with the kind of fiscal targets he has set, 3.2% for this year and 3% for the next year. I also think that he did well to. Since I'm sitting now in the United States, I'm very conscious of what's happening here right now in the last 10 days. So I think he did a good job of drawing attention to the kind of headwinds that we might face coming from the rest of the world, both in terms of the kind of trade protectionism that we might see, not just in the United States, but elsewhere. Also, one thing he didn't mention, which could be, which could also have implications for the rest of the world, is the possibility of reasonably radical changes in the corporate tax structure in this country if the kind of proposals that are being discussed right now by the Republicans and by the President do come into force. My only reason for mentioning this is that whereas nothing can be said right now, there is need for the government of India as well as Indian corporates to be conscious of what might happen here, which might have an impact on India. So having said that,
I agree with the point that you make, Dr. Mohan, that we are probably going to have to face up to the reality of the US bringing down corporate tax rates very radically. But when I pose that question on bringing down corporate tax rates, for large corporations here to 25%, which was the articulated roadmap, the Revenue Secretary said it could be a revenue foregone of 80,000 crore rupees, and hence these are the choices they've got to make. So do you believe from a competitiveness standpoint, this is going to be an area of concern given what we're seeing happen in the rest of the world?
I need to add that I'm not advocating a big cut in Indian corporate tax rates, because the effective rate in any case is low, as the finance minister has pointed out, and he's done a good job of reducing it for small corporates, small companies which don't take advantage of the various exemptions available. So what I didn't see, in fact, in this budget was any mention of removal of any exemptions. And only if you remove the exemptions, then you can bring down the corporate tax rate. My point of mentioning this is only that we need to be aware that we will have to react to this in the best possible fashion, but we do have revenue problems, as you mentioned.
Okay, William Foster, what is the Moody's point of view on the Indian budget? Are you satisfied with the math that the finance minister has put out? Are you satisfied with the fiscal consolidation roadmap that the finance minister has put forward?
I would say, from our perspective, the policy in the budget was very consistent with the careful calibration of advancing fiscal consolidation along with balanced growth. I think this budget did a good job of trying to strike that difficult balance. What's very important to us in the medium term is to see a fiscal deficit path that is consistent with reduction of the debt to GDP ratio over time. And again, this did fall into a medium-term fiscal framework that is attempting to reduce that burden to 60% by 2023, along with reforms that would help strengthen the macro framework and institutional framework and contribute to growth.
Budget change the Moody's picture on India in any way at all, both from an investment, a consumption and a growth perspective?
Well, I just want to emphasize, Moody's currently has the Baa3 rating for India on a positive outlook, which means that we believe that the current mix of policies that focus on fiscal consolidation and reforms that will address the institutional and macro imbalances in the system will, over time, likely create an environment of stronger nominal GDP growth while reducing the deficit through improved revenue collections and more efficient expenditures. And if that is the case, then the positive outlook could ultimately result in an upgrade. So that's important to indicate that we have reiterated our positive outlook, and this budget is consistent with our expectations of moving in that direction.
What would it take for India to get an upgrade, William? And it might be unfair, but the chief economic advisor yesterday said very clearly that rating agencies have been unfair to India, that India deserved an upgrade. You know, China is being seen more favorably than India, though our macros are looking a lot better at this point in time. What will it take to get India an upgrade?
So again, we I believe are the only rating agency with a positive outlook, and that's to say that we believe that if India continues to move forward with an agenda that focuses both on fiscal consolidation and reforms that advance the prospects of recovery in the investment cycle, particularly led by the private sector, that will result in a positive dynamic both from a fiscal perspective and from a growth perspective, and help enhance revenue collections and ultimately positive, a virtuous cycle that would certainly lay the foundation for an upgrade.
Well, we hope that that is on the anvil. William, thanks very much for joining us. Bishwajit, Bhattacharyya, you've been poring over those budget numbers. You know, what is the headline
fiscal, sorry for the interruption. I am concerned about the fiscal situation figures which have been given in the budget.
Okay.
Shereen, if you see the budget, closely analyze the figures. Total expenditure has been budgeted for 21,46,000 crores. Last year it was 19,78,000 crores. So an increase of expenditure of 1,68,000 crores. Recall, this 19,78,000 crores last year, 14,28,000 crores was totally non-productive expenditure like interest payment, defense, subsidy, pension, police, etc.
Okay.
So this year, out of remaining this 1,68,000 crores, all the expenditures have gone up. So for development expenditure, this year we are left. Last year it was 5,50,000 crores. This year, perhaps we are left with even less. So Mr. Vinayak Chatterjee told me just now, for infrastructure sector, 3,80,000 crores have been given.
Yes.
So that means that does not leave anything. So all these announcements which have been made, I am basically questioning the fiscal figure which has been arrived at. And one more thing, total GDP has been budgeted to estimate at 1,68 lakh crores, an increase of 11.75% from last year. Now, in these days of, slowdown, is it realistic? So you inflate the GDP figure and then 5 lakh, inflate the GDP figure, and then you say this 5,46,000 crores divided by 1.68 crores, so it's 3.2%. It's not. So therefore, in my respectful view, another point which I would like to mention is that, railway budget. We all have been hearing that railway budget will be enmeshed with this budget. But I am finding this fiscal deficit figure which has been arrived at from railways operational expenses, apart from this 50,000
but the GBS of railways is 55,000 crore rupees, and the rest is off budget.
So that has been there every year. So what is the difference between last year and this year, snatching out the power from the railway ministry and board and to centralize it? It makes no sense according to me.
I will tell you what, I'll get Rakesh Mohan, who knows the Indian Railways. He was part of a committee, headed a committee that actually did a report on that to respond to your specific specific queries. But Ajay Singh, Manoj, Kohli, thank you very much, and Bishwajit, Bhattacharyya, many thanks for joining us. We'll take a quick break, get Rakesh, Mohan to respond to Mr. Bhattacharyya, and return with more analysis. हाँ Welcome back to the CNBC TV 18 budget headquarters. Now, this budget had several firsts to its credit. To start with, it's been advanced. It was presented on the 1st of February. It's done away with the planned, non-planned division. It's also the first budget that's merged the railway budget along with the union budget. But there are question marks on that merger. Let me bring in a man who knows the Indian railways. Dr. Rakesh Mohan, what did you make of the railway budget aspect of it? Because for 17-18, railway capital expenditure at 1,31,000 crore rupees. They've now decided to set up a railway safety fund with a corpus of 1 lakh crores over the next 5 years. But, you know, you just heard Bishwajit Bhattacharyya there raising questions on what was the point and the purpose of merging the railway budget with the union budget. What did you make or what you heard and saw as far as the railway numbers were concerned?
I have to agree with Mr. Bhattacharyya that, in fact, I was critical of the merger of the railways budget with the union budget because we now have very, very little information on what has actually happened in the railways over the past year and what they're planning for the future. We have no information on what the revenues were, did they make, what kind of losses did they make, how they're going to be financed, and if there's going to be borrowing, is that part of the union borrowing or a separate borrowing? So we have really much less information on the railways now than we used to get. And that's a point that I had made, in fact, when the original announcement was made for this merger. We also have very little information, in fact, no mention of any major railway projects in terms of what's going to happen with the dedicated freight corridors, etc. The safety fund, if my recollection is correct, something like this had been set up something like 10 years ago as well. We don't know what happened with that safety fund after the Kakadkar committee report. So I find this really very, very sketchy information. I do welcome the number of 1,33,000 crores for capital investment because that indeed is a significant step up over last year. So that, I think, is certainly a positive indication. But overall, it is disappointing. There's also no mention of the setting up of Rail Tariff Authority, which has been mentioned for the last number of years. So in that sense, I agree with Mr. Bhattacharyya that what was the objective of merging the railways budget with the union budget? Was the objective to give less information?
Okay, so you're in agreement with the points that were raised by Mr. Bhattacharyya. Mr. Goenka, let me give you the final say then, sir. What does this change? How does the India story change at the end of today? Does it change in any meaningful way?
That's a very difficult question to answer. I think the point that one should make is that the path that India has taken for the last 3 years remains intact. There is no change in that path. We're still going the same direction that we had set out, where the focus is on farmers, on rural, on poor, on inclusiveness, on prudence, financial prudence, on governance, on digital. None of that has changed. So I think one very important thing is that we are not seeing budget to budget a new direction coming in. So that's very important. Also, it's important that India is not following the path of some of the major nations today, which are beginning to bring in more protection, whereas India has continued on the path that we're going to open up our country more and more in terms of foreign investment, in terms of trade and all of that. So we have seen some of that today. So that has not changed. And therefore, that's the important thing. And I think the transparency that is coming in, which you had asked me not to talk about because Vinayak talked about it, is also something very important. And I think one probably wouldn't have expected that from a country like India to bring in that kind of transparency in political contributions and donations. And so that, again, is a positive story. The only thing that I am little sort of concerned about is one aspect that was very hot 2 years ago, which is Make in India. And I didn't see enough in this budget to see that focus on Make in India continues the same way that we had seen when it started 2 years ago. There's some very little mention of it, but that's about it. So
it's interesting that you say that.
It's
interesting that you say that, Dr. Goenka, because even as far as our CEO poll was concerned, Make in India, in terms of government schemes, flagship schemes that have been the most effective, Make in India was actually at the bottom of that CEO poll. So CEOs believe that while there's been a lot of talk around it, there hasn't actually been much impact on the ground. But Dr. Rakesh Mohan, let me end by asking you for a headline, sir. How would you headline Budget 2017?
Responsible, workmanlike, continuation of existing policies, but also almost nothing for raising animal spirits in the country for growth in the future and investment. Just the point that was made just now, that we don't see anything which could enthuse corporate India to invest and get some animal spirits going. Given that we have had a good record of growth, how do we get it further? No mention of an aspiration of 8 to 9% growth in the future. We understand the current constraints, but one does hope and expect more in the sense of enthusing the investment community to invest more in India.
Okay, so short on the ability to be able to unleash the animal spirits. That's the headline there from the former Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank, and Pawan Goenka mirroring what Dr. Rakesh Mohan has said. Pawan Goenka, Rakesh Mohan, appreciate you joining us here. We'll take a break, but return back on the CNBC TV 18 budget headquarters. There's plenty more to talk about and plenty of big voices joining us.